I'm Linda. I'm 13 years old. I have autism and severe dyslexia, and my mentors are Chloe and Matt Arnold, and you shall see a picture of them. And also, I love urban, and I love Hollywood, and I love my puppies. And also, it's all about being my autistic self, and also I stumbled there, blah, blah, blah.
Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Lead Us Top Styles. We're lucky to have a guest again, John Fela. I'm going to read the introduction because I cannot remember anything off the top of my head anymore. John Fela is the Ministry Relations Manager at Joni and Friends Chicago, working with churches to equip and train them to help the disabled and their communities. Previous to that, he spent almost 20 years in education working with children from infants to middle school, serving in a variety of roles, including teacher, mentor teacher, and school director. John lives in Lyons, Illinois, and is married to his wife, Faith, and father to his son, Christopher, who is on the autism spectrum. He is a public speaker, multiple podcast guest, and regular contributor to Key Ministries Special Needs Family blog, as well as other special needs blogs, including Hope Anew and The Mighty. Connect with John on his website, and we will have that in the description below and on our website. John,
Great.
Thanks for agreeing to be on this podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Lita, do you think you can start with the questions? Do you remember the questions? I'm going to have to ask the questions right now, aren't I?
That's all right. Yeah. I'll take that from either one.
Wonderful. She is trying very hard to start doing this, but it's not that easy when you're a kiddo. Your son was diagnosed with special needs. What was that like as a new father, finding out your son had autism?
Absolutely. I'll tell you that in the early days, because first of all, we didn't get the formal diagnosis until he was about 3, which is relatively typical in this world. But the reality of it for us was, I think we didn't know what we didn't know, as they say. So we noticed, for example, he was premature. He was 5 weeks early. He was definitely low birth weight, failure to thrive, all of those things. We noticed that there were some motor issues. There were some communication issues. Okay, what did that really mean? Was there truly a delay? Was it just because, as we had heard, boys talk later type of a thing? There could have been any number of things. It really wasn't until he hit his 18-month checkup that we went to see his pediatrician. We went through the battery of questions. And is he talking? Not really. We're not really getting a lot of sound. So she said, okay. And I always love telling this story. She told us, what you want to do is go across the street to the professional building and have him see the speech therapist. And I don't know what they do. This is what she said. I don't know what they do, but they play with the kids and they make them talk. So go see the speech therapist. He'll be fine. We tried that. She played with him. He didn't talk. We had his hearing tested. We went through some other tests. We went through in Illinois what's known as early intervention services. So we did have some therapists come to the house and do an assessment. Again, they didn't diagnose him with anything, but they said that there's something here. So I would tell you, in the early days, it was really more of a struggle of what I assumed was just being a parent, because it was my first child. I didn't know. And you have the sleepless nights, and you have what you assume is just a colicky baby or a fussy baby. And then as time goes on, okay, there could be something else here. And now what? I don't have control of this situation. Regardless of the things we've tried, nothing so far has worked. How far of a rabbit hole are we going to go down here? And what is that going to mean for our life as a family? So I would tell you, in those early days, it was pretty confusing. It was scary. And I really didn't feel like I had a lot of control over any of it, quite honestly.
I think a lot of parents can relate to that. I know that it's hard for parents who are coming from outside the community, who don't have or weren't diagnosed as a youth themselves with autism, finding all the support they need. Was that an issue you had, trying to locate what support you need and even knowing what support you needed?
Absolutely. And that's a huge part of my stories, I think. So what we faced in the beginning, as a lot of families do, was that we were really on an island. We had some family, not a lot. As I always joke, at least in terms of my ex-wife, my son's mom, we were a family of only. So I was an only child. So was she. So was my son. So we didn't have a lot of extended family in the area. We had some friends. A lot of them, their kids were older or weren't special needs thing. We didn't have anyone we could really relate to. And that was a problem because one, we didn't have a lot of shared life experiences we could compare to. But then I speak to in my story just how much this affected me as a man, as a husband, because again, as I described, that early environment of not having control in things, typically for men, the way that they cope with this is that they throw themselves into their work and they're the providers and the breadwinners, the money, etc. I was never the breadwinner in my family. My wife always made more money and she handled the calendars and the doctors and the therapists and all these things. So again, what did I do? Right now, of course, later on in life, it got to the point where I became an advocate myself. So I have a lot of resources and relationships, but in the beginning, it was just me. And I like to tell the story in some of my presentations where I remember it was during the summer of, I believe, 2012. And my son was probably about 4 at the time. And I remember that it was a Friday night. I was sitting outside of a church we attended at the time because there was a men's group that would meet on Friday nights. And I was sitting in the car because we were at that point where nothing was working, right? We didn't know what we were going to do for our son. We did have a diagnosis then, which at the time was actually pervasive developmental disorder. It wasn't straight autism, which now that no longer exists. My son just has autism. We were struggling in terms of school placement. We were struggling in our marriage. We were struggling financially. I actually had a job loss. And so nothing was going right. And I remember I was sitting in the parking lot before this thing at the church and I had some time. I called 2 of my oldest friends. One was my best friend from high school. One was my roommate from college. Both married. They didn't have kids yet at the time. I'm talking to them. I'm explaining all this. And basically both of their words to me were, "We love you, man, but we got nothing for you." I don't know what to tell you. And then I wind up going into this meeting with these guys who, for the most part, were probably 20 years older than me. I was in my 30s at the time. So most of these guys are probably 50s, 60s and older. And I'm thinking I'm going to get some sage wisdom or advice as I poured my heart out. And they knew me, but they didn't really know everything I was going through. And to my surprise, the room was just stunned silence. And then finally, the group leader said, "That sounds really bad. We're sorry to hear it. But what you need to hear is that it's going to be okay." Now, here's the thing. In the long run, in the big picture, yeah, it was going to be okay. Is that what I needed to hear in that moment? No. I needed someone to support me. I needed someone to walk alongside of me, someone who understood me. And I wasn't getting that. And that was the moment it hit me. I had no community. I had no support. At least not in this world. I might have had friends, I might have had family, but they didn't get it. And that's where I got really intentional and conscious about, okay, we've got to find us some community somewhere.
I understand that one completely because I've heard that from a lot of the parents that both my husband and I have met. We both were in the community as children. We have a community of other autistic parents, but the neurotypical parents coming in all seem to be on an island the moment they get that diagnosis.
Yeah. And that very much was our experience. And I would tell you that continued to be our experience really for several years. It wasn't until it was actually that same year that I just mentioned. We actually moved from where my son was born. We always lived in the north suburbs of Chicago. We moved to a different town to get him into our understanding was probably the best suburban school district we could find. And it actually turned out to be really great for him. But we had to move heaven and earth to sell our house, figure out where we were going to live, timing of all of these things. So there were a lot of moving parts. And again, all within this environment of stress, anxiety, and quite honestly, fear, because we didn't know exactly how this was going to work out. I honestly didn't know if I was going to stay in my marriage. We were that close to separating at that time. And as I also speak to in a lot of my presentations, I was literally on the verge of suicide. And I'm very transparent about that. So a lot of things changed for us on multiple levels. But the reality of it was once we got into a better school district, with a more intentional community, when we were in an area and a neighborhood, literally with other families like us, and then also getting connected with some other therapies in that same area and families who maybe lived in the same area, or maybe went to the same schools or the same school district, we had a little bit more of commonality with. That's when those relationships really started to blossom. But again, that was something that we had to literally pick ourselves up and move to a different physical location to actually find and access, and then be more intentional about also building those relationships as well.
And the dog has decided he wants to make his presence known right now.
It makes more.
Yeah. He does not like being ignored. And you are ignoring me. There's not a lot out there for dads. Can you talk about trying to find support for the dads and what you needed as a dad?
Absolutely. So I touched on it a little bit when I talked about just how, as a man and as a husband, I was lost. I didn't know my place. What did I do? If I wasn't making all the money, if I wasn't handling all the therapies and things, what was my role? And what I learned was, one, I needed support. But two, I also needed support in a very unique way as a guy. And so in the early days, some of that was just connecting with other special needs dads and hang out and go for a beer or some food and talk about this or that. And I definitely had some of that. We actually wound up, when we moved, we started attending a different church, and I definitely found some more support from the guys there as well. But I also had to, again, get really intentional about developing this network kind of a thing, these supports. And the real struggle is that it's something that all guys need. It's something that all husbands need, especially in this world, and fathers, special needs fathers. But a lot of times there aren't as many resources as compared to the moms. They don't know how to access them. And a lot of times there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of, this is just not me. I don't want to share. So in the early days, what I actually started with, and I remember I started this probably 10 years ago at this point, was I started a meetup group just for special needs dads, just from like my son's school, right? Just all those dads from that group. And we all met one time on a Friday night, and it was a local restaurant we went to, and we had a great time. And then I tried it again like the month later or whatever it was, and I get one or two guys. And then it pretty much fizzled after. And unfortunately, that's the thing with guys, is guys a lot of times will maybe go to something once, maybe they'll come back, but it's not like a consistent thing, right? They have a very hard time with just making those kind of commitments for a lot of reasons. I eventually restarted that effort a few years later with another guy I had met. And actually the group that I started with him, which he's backed out of it over the last couple of years, but I still run it. But we still meet at the same location. Sometimes I'll get guest speakers. We have guys that come every month, and the group fluctuates. It could be between 5 or 10 guys, sometimes more, sometimes less. It just depends. I just like to do it because it's always there. But then as I developed my advocacy work and getting connected with more organizations locally and nationally, there's a few good ones for dads that I always talk about. One specifically is Special Fathers Network. So Special Fathers Network is a national special needs dads organization. It's based out of Chicago, but it has national reach. Most of the resources on there, like a lot of stuff today, is virtual. So, for example, you can get connected with a virtual support group. Some are specific to geography, meaning that there are some that meet in a given area. And in fact, you guys are in Colorado Springs, and we've actually got a chapter out in Colorado Springs as well. So that's cool. You can meet virtually, you can meet in person. It just depends where you're at. We also have a mentoring program. So if you're a guy I don't want to be with a big group of guys, maybe I just want to talk to one. We have a mentoring program you can get matched with, where you can find one guy. Maybe he's in your area, or maybe you meet in person or do something over the phone or virtual, whatever. We've also got a ton of other resources virtually. We've got videos. We've got a great podcast list. There's a yearly conference that's virtual as well. So a lot of great resources and ways to get plugged in if you're trying to meet dads like you. There's a couple of other organizations I plugged to. One is called Rising Above Ministries. They're based out of Kentucky. They actually do really good things with mom and dad groups. Special Fathers Network is not a faith-based group. Rising Above is. So it is a Christian ministry. But again, if you don't necessarily consider yourself Christian, that's okay. They would still obviously accept you. The thing, it's just an awareness of the environment you're in, kind of thing. They do virtual support groups as well. And then there's another organization called Dad's Commission, and they have a website, and they also similarly do a lot of virtual stuff, podcasts, that type of thing. And I know they also do some larger like dad outings, like on a national level. Rising Above Ministries actually has something I think they called, I forget the exact name of it, but it's some kind of a dad's boot camp, but it's for special needs dads. They have these outings. They do these like camping trips and that kind of thing. Father's Commission has more of like a bigger gathering, almost like a conference kind of thing. And they do that, I think, a few times a year around the country. So those are some organizations I always like to plug and just speak to the resources. But again, emphasize to guys, look, if you don't have anybody in your community, you don't have a neighbor to talk to or somebody in your family, you can find someone. Maybe you don't want to talk to a bunch of guys. Start with one, talk to one. But you can't do it alone. You got to find somebody. So have someone you can at least talk to.
We'll make sure to link those resources in the description below for everyone. Can you speak a little bit about how your faith has helped you in this journey?
Yeah, that has been really essential for me, at least. And again, I speak to faith-based church groups. I speak to secular groups. The way that I tell my story is this. And again, when someone asks me about support, what does support look like for me as a special needs dad? I always come down to it's a one little A, one little B conversation, right? So one little A is my faith, my Christian faith is my foundation. That is absolutely where I get my support and strength from. One B is community, right? You must have community. You may not have faith, but you must have community. And for me, though, why faith is important is because, first of all, I was on quite a spiritual journey my whole life. I was raised Catholic. My ex-wife, my son's mom was actually raised Jewish, and we had a lot of experiences just being in a lot of different worlds and that type of thing. But I think when we came to our Christian faith, when we developed a relationship with Jesus, that really, I think, shifted things because, first of all, it allowed me to get past a lot of that guilt and shame that I was carrying as a father of disability. And also in terms of the things that I felt like I couldn't do. And instead of looking at the list of the things that I felt I couldn't do or where I wasn't matching up, I actually started looking at how I was uniquely created. What was I created to do and do well? And then, of course, when I found that calling, which my gifting, again, my son's mom's gifting, my ex-wife's gifting is organization, detail, having everything together in a plan. Awesome. And not saying I couldn't do that, but she does it better than me. But my gifting is relationships. My gifting is advocacy. My gifting is developing resources, sharing resources, and really seeing how you can help me, I can help you. But that was something I had to lean into. And again, it wasn't until I came to faith and then I really understood what my true value was as a person and as a husband that I could really tap into that. So that's why that's foundational for me. And at the end of the day, what I learned about men supporting men in a healthy, supportive way, a lot of that came from my initial experiences being with men's groups through good churches and men's ministry and men's support groups through that, because that really showed me how guys show up for each other. They may not get exactly what you're going through, but they absolutely respond well enough to say, hey, listen, wherever you're at, if I can help you, let me try kind of thing. So that's where I keep coming back to. And again, specifically in my journey as a man and as a dad.
Did it help you at all? Because I've noticed being inside the community my whole life, sometimes neurotypical parents also have a problem understanding that their kids are uniquely made, that their kids are, well, they do need the help with speech and OT and everything. There's no need to find a full cure for what they have.
Mhm.
Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you know what? That's a tough conversation when faith comes in because I have talked to people who are straight up atheists who say, "What God would give my child these issues or create my child this way?" And then at the same time, you have folks who say, "Your child can be healed. Let's just pray it away. Let's just have enough faith and your child will be." Here's the hard, cold reality of it: everyone is made and uniquely gifted in their own way. Everyone is a life that is precious and needs to be respected. Absolutely. Regardless of how you are made, regardless of how you show up, regardless of your challenges, the reality is that you are uniquely and wonderfully made exactly how you were meant. Now, there are plenty of folks that I talk to that are not religious or not spiritual, whether they're advocates themselves or not, or work with one work disability organization that still have those feelings, even if they're not coming from a religious place. But at the same time, again, where it gets complicated is people will say, if there was a God, then why would this happen? Here's the thing you have to understand. We have to flush some of these myths, right? And some of these myths are, first of all, if you only had enough faith, here's the reality. You can have all the faith in the world, but you know what? God knew what God was doing when he made your child, just like when he made you, right? And he also made you to be your child's parents. Some people take that line and they say, oh, that means that God only gives you what you can handle, right? No, actually, God gives you a lot more than you can handle a lot of the time. So you can grow, so you can lean more into your faith or lean more into him or go out and find the support. If raising my child with a disability was easy, I never would have probably changed as a person, period, or at least tried to figure out how I could be a better husband, dad, person, etc. Right? It challenged me. And these are the things that we have to look at in life. And so when we talk about the value of life, right? I think that many people I've talked to in the disability community will say all life is precious. Now, there are some, again, that will push back against that faith piece. But then again, what I always let them know is, hey, listen, every person has a gift. They were meant to be that way. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you don't have hard days, and I get it, but you need to lean into the gifts that that person also brings, the gifts that that person provides. I know my son has inspired and motivated some of his therapists to look into different things or maybe challenge themselves professionally or whatever. We can say that about a lot of folks in our community. So what are their gifts and talents? Everybody's got them. What is your child? And likewise, then what is yours? Because we all have something we're dealing with. We all have something we're trying to overcome in life, whatever that is. In your child's case, it might look differently. Your child might present differently. It might show up differently. But that doesn't mean that your child also doesn't have some very unique and special gifts that can be harnessed. And if nothing else, respect and love them for just the creation they are. And I think any of us can do that regardless of exactly the perspective we're coming
That answered my question because I have throughout my entire life had people, atheists, Christians, religions of all kinds go, oh, you're not perfect. Lita, one of the reasons she's starting her dance studio is she had dance teachers even tell her she was broken, she was worthless, even though she's working with some of the best choreographers in the country. Let's ignore that and just focus on her autism. And we've got parents coming in going, I would love my child to have this experience, but they're not neurotypical. So I'm not going to I can't let them have this experience.
and that's a real shame in that because you don't want to limit your kids. And one of the things that I always talk to about this dynamic of like being a man and having not just a child with a disability, but a male child, because a lot of times I think what you find is there's a lot of shame in terms of the dad wanting the son to live vicariously through the son, or I was a big time athlete when I was younger, son, you're going to be that too, or I want to take you hunting or fishing, or we're going to go do this or that. A lot of those things just don't happen when disability comes in. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship with your child, right? And so I always like to tell the story of, hey, listen, my son likes watching sports on TV. He loves watching football. He's not going to play football, but that doesn't mean I can't pass a ball around with him or something. Or when we used to have a basketball hoop in our driveway, okay, he didn't have the motor skills really to be able to be strong enough to make a shot, but he liked it when I did it and he clapped for me and he thought that was awesome. All right, great. That's fine. That's how you're connecting with your child. And again, in my son's case too, even with a lot of these therapies and things, my son has done equine therapy. He's done some of the horse riding therapy. He's done swim therapy. He's done special needs karate with a Special Olympics coach. He's actually done speech therapy in a pool because water is such a big motivator for him that he's getting speech and swim therapy at the same time. It's plugging into, okay, he likes these things. And if there's a therapy component, which there is a therapy component to a lot of these things now, which is great. But even if there isn't, is it just something they would like? That's okay. Let's maybe actually have them do something they like too, instead of it. I think as parents, we get into this mindset of, we've got to fix them. We've got to fix them. We've got to fix them. Just get them into more therapy. Just have them do more school. Just have them it's like, they're a person like anyone else. They deserve a break. They deserve to enjoy their life. They deserve to do fun things and things that they actually want to do. And that's actually a conversation that I have with a lot of adult parents, especially when they're looking at things like employment opportunities. And someone who was a job coach for a time, I can tell you that is something that absolutely comes into the conversation is, okay, I get that they can do this job. Do they want to do this job? Is it something they actually want to do? And is it something they want to do for many years to come? Because if you were in a job you didn't like, you'd be like, forget it. Let's go find the next thing. We have to respect that decision for them too.
I totally hear that. The number of people who got upset when I was doing jobs going, you're autistic and you can't do it. And I'm like, I'm your boss. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know as a job coach, we've helped some of the clients we worked with who were in situations where they were basically told, no, you're where you need to be. You're staying here. Even if they didn't like the job, even if they were capable of doing more and wanted to do more, there's sometimes just a narrow focus. And then in those cases, it's just really a matter of, all right, we just need to find somewhere else.
My favorite is always when the interns find out I'm autistic and they're like, I can't work for you. And I'm like 6 rungs above you. You can go talk to someone else.
Mm-hmm. And eventually work your way up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, and they're all young and cute. And it's like, oh, did my mic go again? Lita, can you hear me? Okay. I've been having difficulties with my mic this week. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your son?
Yeah, absolutely. Chris is 16. He's on the autism spectrum and also nonverbal. Chris, I would tell you the one thing that I've appreciated about being his father is that is a kid who, and again, now that he's 16 and he's a teenager, we definitely get a little bit more of the surly stuff, which, okay, that's typical. That's normal. That's great. But from the time he was a young child, he was a kid that was always happy. And it didn't matter what was going on or, did he understand what was happening around him or not. He was just always a happy kid. And he just loved life. And I do remember it's a little funny now because again, being older and he's slowed down a little bit. He still likes to move, but he was younger. He was really, and it was something where I learned how to be a good parent by just being with him. It wasn't about, okay, we have to go. I'm going to give you X amount of time and we'll do this. And then whatever, that's our time today. In the early days, especially because his mom she also had a part-time job on the weekends. A lot of times it was just me and him on the weekends. And we would just every weekend, it was a different park or a forest preserve or something playground. Let's go here. Let's check this out. And we'll go out to eat. And it was just the experience of being with him and being dad. And I think as stressful as those times were because of how much we had on our plate, I can look back on them now with a pretty good deal of fondness because I just got to be with my kid and I just got to experience life with him. And it really didn't matter. Again, you take him to the kids museum and you have some parents who are all about, is there an educational aspect to this? Which that's cool. I'm like, I'm not worried about that with my kid. My kid is just here to explore and play and do whatever. And we can let that go. And that was cool. And I think also too, just letting go some of those expectations for myself as well, just raising him. But Chris is a kid who has worked very hard his whole life. He has been in therapy since, again, the early days, 1 or 2 years old. I would tell you that if there is a therapy out there, we've either done it with him or at least looked at it or a protocol or whatever. Some things, as we all know in this world, some things work better than others. I've definitely heard of something working for at least one person that I've talked to, but there's no magic bullet. But we've definitely tried a lot of things. One of the things that I think was really unique about our experience raising him too was when he was 11, he actually developed a seizure disorder and it came out of nowhere. We were totally caught off guard. He essentially just one day he was coming home from therapy and he had 3 grand mal seizures in one day. We discovered he had something called the Chiari, Chiari, which is essentially a malformation of the skulls. So basically the skull and the brain are not growing symmetrically. So it was putting pressure on causing the seizures. So he needed to have some decompression surgery. I will tell you the hardest day of my life as a parent was the day he went to the hospital for that surgery. So when he first had the seizures, we were in the hospital for the whole weekend. They looked at the scans. They said, he's got this. It's not like we can give him medication, but he is going to need this surgery. This was a kid who, again, has been totally happy his whole life, totally fearless, nothing bothering him. And I remember taking him to the hospital that morning. It was early. It was 5 o'clock. It just kept coming. And this kid is shaking like a leaf. And because he knows this is a big deal, whatever this is, why I'm here. Because we had talked to him and we knew that he understood things, but I had never seen this. And all I remember was just telling him it was going to be okay. Even though in my heart and head, I'm like, I don't know that. And it's hard for me to have to tell my son that in this place because I have to be the parent. I have to be the support. I have to love him. I have to be strong. but I was shaking like a leaf on the inside too. And it was just one of these really cathartic experiences because he went to the triage and they prepped him and they gave him a little sedative and off he went. And we're in the waiting room and we're freaking out. And I went to the chapel to pray there was no tomorrow and then come back. And it was less than 90 minutes. And the neurosurgeon who's probably done this 100 times before was, yeah, no big deal, easy. And we're like, okay, that's easy for you to say. But he came back in, took us up to the room. My son was in the hospital for a few days recovering. It was like a 6-week recovery at home, but he managed fine. And so now it's something where he really hasn't had any seizures since then. He's had a couple of minor ones, but I think that's just been a medication tweak because it's been growing. But other than that, I would tell you that he's been a happy, healthy kid. He's currently living at a residential facility in Kansas called Heart Spring. And the reason for that is because his sophomore year, which he's a junior now, his sophomore year of high school, unfortunately, was not good for a lot of reasons. Again, as I've described, he's normally a very happy, joyful kid. He started to show some aggression towards school staff and also to his parents. Um, we don't exactly know what it was all about. It could be hormonal on some levels. We know that it also is related to GI stuff, which is also pretty typical in our world. But he's always had really bad GI stuff. We found some blockages that need to be cleared. And again, he can't go to the bathroom and he can't tell you. That's where the claws come out, because if I can't tell you one way, I'll tell you another way. So we had that experience and we tried to find a placement that was closer to home and nothing matched. So eventually we found these folks, and I would tell you, he's been having a wonderful experience there. He moved there in June. It's not a permanent transition. It's just for the right now. But for parents who are maybe considering that for their kids or maybe have questions about that, I will tell you that was also a very hard transition for me to let my son go and be that far away and see him every other month, essentially. I think we actually just came back from a visit this last week. But it's what he needs right now, and he's thriving, and they're doing a great job with him. So there's a lot of fear and anxiety to be had. There's a lot of surrender in terms of controlling these situations, but there's a lot of hope too. And that's what keeps us going.
I can understand that. Sorry, Lita didn't feel like speaking today. She's having one of those days. Aren't you, Lita?
It's okay. We're just glad she's here.
Like I said, she woke up with a sore throat. And by time this episode airs, her father should hopefully be home from the Middle East.
I
And
perked her up.
yeah, she has been missing him for the last few months.
I bet. Yeah.
She's a teenager. It's one of those situations.
I get it. Yeah.
She's reached that age where parents are annoying. Yeah, you're not on mic, so no one can hear your cute range. But thank you for coming on, John. Where can people find you on the web?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give my little disclaimer here, as I mentioned. My name is, as you see it on here, John Fela. However, most of my content as an advocate these last several years has been under my previous married name, which is actually Fela Geller, Felageler. I do have a website. The website is just johnfela.com. So you can go to johnfela.com and you can see most of my content, speaking, videos, podcasts, etc., writing. But you can also just plug me into the Google machine. But if you do that, you might want to try under Fela Geller, because that's where most of the content is. So most of the stuff is on my website, not everything, but either way, you'll find most of my stuff. And then I'm all over the social media as well. Feel free to check out me on there or connect with me, no problem. I'm on Facebook. I have a regular Facebook, which is just my name, but then I also have a blog page called John's Special Needs Blog on Facebook. So that's just like my public page. I'm on Instagram I believe it's John_Fela_1. So just plug that in somehow. You'll get me on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, X, all the rest.
We will make sure to put a link to your website in the description below. And on the podcast website, we have a page of all of our guests who are future or former guests as we have them coming on. And we'll make sure to link to it there too.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That way everyone can find you. Thanks so much for your time today. And thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right. You will be back next week with more Lita's Tap Styles and hopefully a talking Lita by then.
Okay, well, thank you for watching the podcast, and please subscribe, and also look at the adorable paper. So if you want to subscribe for it, and also please leave a like, and don't forget, if you subscribe to us, if you won't miss any of our new podcast feeds. And also, did you see the adorable paper? Don't you like it?